I was not supposed to be there the night the Duke of Ashworth confessed his sins. I was not supposed to hear the words that would shatter everything I believed about the man who had destroyed me. Let me tell you how a servant girl came to kneel in the shadows of a confessional, how fate placed me behind a wooden screen at the precise moment when truth finally broke through the fortress of a nobleman's pride. Let me tell you how forgiveness found me when I was not searching for it, and how love returned to me in the most sacred and unexpected of places. My name is Clara Weston, though that was not always the name I carried. Once I was Clara Finch, a kitchen maid in the great house of Ashworth Manor, young and foolish and desperately in love with a man who could never have been mine. I was 17 when I first entered service at the manor, fresh from the village with nothing but a worn dress and a letter of recommendation from the vicar's wife. The housekeeper, Mrs. Thornton, looked me over with the sharp eyes of a woman who had seen too many girls come and go, too many hearts broken by impossible dreams. "You will work hard here," she told me, "and you will keep your eyes down and your thoughts to yourself. The Duke is a fair master, but he values order above all things. Do not give him cause to notice you." I promised her I would be invisible, that I would be nothing more than a pair of hands scrubbing floors and carrying coal. I meant every word of that promise. I had no idea how thoroughly I would fail to keep it. The manor itself seemed designed to overwhelm the senses of a simple village girl. I remember standing in the entrance hall on my first day, my small bundle of belongings clutched against my chest, staring up at the vaulted ceiling where cherubs and angels danced in faded gold and rose. The walls were lined with portraits of Ashworth ancestors, generations of stern-faced men and elegant women who seemed to watch my every move with disapproval. Crystal chandeliers caught the pale winter light and scattered it into 1,000 fragments, and the marble floor beneath my feet was so polished I could see my own reflection, a small and insignificant figure lost in all that grandeur. Mrs. Thornton led me through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, past drawing rooms and sitting rooms and music rooms, past a library with more books than I had ever seen in my life, past a conservatory filled with tropical plants that breathed warmth and humidity into the cold English air. I tried to memorize the route, knowing that I would be expected to navigate this labyrinth alone, but the house seemed determined to confuse me, to remind me at every turn that I did not belong here. The servants' quarters were a different world entirely. Small, cramped rooms lined the upper floors, accessible only by narrow back staircases that the family never used. My room was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, with a single window that looked out over the kitchen garden. But it was mine, the first space I had ever had to myself, and I was grateful for it in a way that my fellow servants could not understand. The kitchen was the heart of the servants' domain, a vast cavern of heat and noise and constant activity. The cook, Mrs. Patterson, ruled this space with an iron ladle and a vocabulary that would have made a sailor blush. She took one look at me and assigned me to the lowest tasks, scrubbing pots and carrying coal and emptying ash from the countless fireplaces that kept the great house warm. I did not complain. I knew my place, and I was determined to earn a better one through hard work and obedience. The days blurred together in those first weeks, an endless cycle of labor that left me too exhausted to think, too tired to dream. I rose before dawn and fell into bed long after sunset, my hands raw and red from lye soap, my back aching from carrying loads that seemed heavier than my own body. I learned the rhythms of the household, the intricate dance of servants and masters that kept the manor running smoothly. I learned which corridors to avoid at which times, which footmen could be trusted, and which would report any infraction to Mrs. Thornton, which maids were kind, and which would steal your rations if you turned your back. And I learned about the Duke. He was spoken of in whispers among the servants, his name carrying a weight that made the air itself seem heavier. They said he had been different once, before his wife died. They said he had laughed then, had hosted balls and hunting parties, had been the most sought-after bachelor in 3 counties before his marriage, But Victoria's death had changed him, had frozen something inside him that would never thaw. Now he moved through his own house like a ghost, present but not truly there, his eyes seeing everything and nothing at the same time. The Duke of Ashworth was not what I had expected. The village tales painted him as a cold man, distant and unapproachable, a figure of power who moved through the world without ever truly touching it. They said his wife had died young, that he had shut himself away in grief, that he spoke to no one unless necessity demanded it. They said his heart was made of the same gray stone as his ancestral home. When I first saw him, I understood why they spoke of him in such terms. He stood in the great hall beneath the portrait of his ancestors, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, though he could not have been more than 35. His face was handsome in the severe way of men who have forgotten how to smile, all sharp angles and shadows, with eyes the color of a winter storm. He did not look at me. He looked through me, as though I were made of the same air he breathed, present but unremarkable. I should have been grateful for his indifference. Instead, I found myself watching him in stolen moments, learning the rhythm of his days, memorizing the way he walked and spoke and stood before the fire on cold evenings. I told myself it was curiosity, nothing more. I told myself that any girl would be fascinated by such a man, that it meant nothing. I was young. I did not yet understand that the heart does not ask permission before it begins to love. The first time he truly looked at me, I was on my knees in the great hall, scrubbing a stain from the marble floor that had defeated 3 other maids before me. It was early morning, the house still quiet, and I had thought myself alone. I had been working on the stain for nearly an hour, my knees aching and my arms trembling with fatigue, when I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up, expecting to see Mrs. Thornton or one of the footmen, and found myself staring directly into the storm-gray eyes of the Duke of Ashworth. He had stopped mid-stride, clearly surprised to find someone in his path at this hour. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I was frozen there on my knees, my scrub brush dripping dirty water onto the pristine floor, my face flushed with exertion, and now with something else entirely. He studied me with an expression I could not read, his gaze moving over my face as though he were trying to solve a puzzle. "You are new," he said at last. His voice was deep and resonant, with an undertone of rust, as though it was not often used. "Yes, Your Grace," I managed to say. "I started 3 weeks ago." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "You work very hard. I have seen you in the corridors, always carrying something, always rushing somewhere." I did not know how to respond. I had not realized he had noticed me at all, had assumed that his gaze passed over servants without registering their presence. The knowledge that he had seen me, had remembered seeing me, sent a strange warmth spreading through my chest. "Hard work is all I have to offer, Your Grace," I said. Something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been amusement or might have been pain. Then it was gone, shuttered behind the mask of indifference that he wore like armor. "See that you do not wear yourself out," he said. "A tired servant is a careless servant, and carelessness leads to broken things." He stepped around me and continued on his way, his footsteps echoing through the empty hall. I remained kneeling on the cold marble long after he had disappeared, my heart pounding so hard I was certain the whole house could hear it. That was the beginning of everything, that one moment of connection, that single exchange of words that meant nothing and everything at the same time. I tried to convince myself that it was meaningless, that he spoke to dozens of servants every day, that I was no different from any other girl who scrubbed his floors and polished his silver. But some part of me knew better. Some part of me had recognized in his eyes a loneliness that matched my own, a hunger for something he could not name. The months passed in a blur of labor and exhaustion, of early mornings and late nights, of scrubbed floors and polished silver. I grew stronger in body and more foolish in spirit, for I could not stop myself from seeking glimpses of the Duke. I learned to time my tasks so that I might pass through the corridors when he was likely to be walking to his study. I lingered in the breakfast room after the meal was cleared, hoping to catch the sound of his voice as he spoke with his steward. I was careful, or so I believed. I never approached him. I never spoke to him. I simply loved him from a distance that should have been safe. It was not safe. Nothing about love is safe. I began to learn things about him, small details that I treasured like precious gems. I learned that he took his coffee black and bitter, that he preferred to read in the library by candlelight rather than by the harsh glare of the gas lamps, that he walked the grounds alone each evening, regardless of the weather. I learned that he was fair to his tenants, generous to his servants, respected by his peers even if he was not loved by them. I learned that he received letters from London that made his jaw clench and his eyes go cold, letters from solicitors and bankers and men who wanted things from him that he was not willing to give. I learned that he visited his wife's grave every Sunday morning, rain or shine, and that he always placed a single white rose on the stone. The other servants thought him cold, but I knew better. I saw the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching, the way his eyes would fix on some distant point, as though he were seeing something the rest of us could not perceive. I saw the loneliness that wrapped around him like a shroud, the weight of grief that bowed his shoulders even as he held himself rigidly upright. He was not cold. He was frozen, encased in ice of his own making, terrified of what might happen if he allowed himself to thaw, and fool that I was, I wanted to be the one to warm him. The night that changed everything began with rain. It had been falling for 3 days without cease, turning the grounds into a sea of mud and keeping the household confined within walls that seemed to grow smaller with each passing hour. The other servants were restless and irritable, snapping at one another over trifles, and I had fled to the library to escape them. I was not supposed to be there, of course. The library was the Duke's private sanctuary, forbidden to all but the most senior staff. But I had discovered long ago that the door was rarely locked, and I had developed a habit of slipping inside during the late evening hours to read by candlelight. The library was my secret paradise, a room that seemed to exist outside the ordinary rules of the house. 3 stories of books rose around me like the walls of a cathedral, their spines a rainbow of leather and gilt, their pages holding worlds I had never imagined existed. I had taught myself to read as a girl, picking out letters from the Bible and the almanac that were the only books my family possessed. But I had never dreamed that so many books existed, that there were stories and histories and philosophies enough to fill 1,000 lifetimes. I had claimed a particular corner of the library as my own, a window seat hidden behind heavy velvet curtains where I could curl up with a volume of poetry or a novel and forget, for a few precious hours, the life that awaited me beyond these walls. The Duke rarely came to the library after dinner, preferring to shut himself in his study with his ledgers and his correspondence, so I felt relatively safe in my stolen refuge. That night, I was lost in a collection of sonnets, the words washing over me like music, when I heard footsteps approaching. My heart seized with panic. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, praying that whoever it was would retrieve their book and leave without discovering me. The footsteps stopped. "I know you are there." The voice was low and quiet, neither angry nor kind. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of a man accustomed to being obeyed. I emerged from behind the curtains with my face burning and my hands trembling, prepared to beg for mercy, prepared to plead for my position. The Duke stood before the fireplace, watching me with those storm-gray eyes, and I could read nothing in his expression. He was dressed more casually than I had ever seen him, his cravat loosened and his coat discarded, his white shirt open at the collar. The firelight played across his features, softening the harsh angles, making him look younger and more vulnerable than he did by daylight. A glass of brandy dangled from his fingers, half empty, and I wondered how many glasses had come before it. "You are the girl who watches me," he said. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to claim innocence, to protest that I had no idea what he meant, that I was simply a maid who had made a mistake by entering a room above her station. But the lie would not come. He knew. He had always known. And somehow, standing there in the flickering firelight, I could not bring myself to dishonor the truth of what I felt by pretending it did not exist. "Yes, Your Grace," I whispered. "I am." Something shifted in his face then, something I could not name. He turned away from me, staring into the fire, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. "How long?" he asked finally. I did not pretend to misunderstand. "Since the beginning. Since my first week in your service." He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had held any humor. 6 months. You have been watching me for 6 months, and I have been pretending not to notice." "You noticed?" He turned back to face me, and the expression in his eyes made my breath catch. "Of course I noticed. I notice everything about you, the way you move through my house like a ghost, always there but never quite visible, the way you time your tasks to cross my path, the way you look at me when you think I cannot see." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, hot and shameful. "I am sorry, Your Grace. I never meant to cause offense. I will go. I will leave tonight. I will never trouble you again." He held up a hand to stop me. "That is not what I want." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I was afraid to examine. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, waiting for him to continue. "You are very young," he said, "too young to understand what you are doing." "I am old enough to know my own heart," I answered, "and even now I cannot say what possessed me to speak so boldly. Perhaps it was the rain, the sense of being suspended outside of ordinary time. Perhaps it was the knowledge that I had already lost everything the moment he discovered me. Whatever the reason, I found myself moving toward him, drawn by a force I could not resist. He caught my wrist before I could touch him. His grip was firm, but not cruel, and when he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. It was not anger, it was not contempt, it was fear. "You do not know what you are asking for," he said. "You do not know what I am." "Then tell me," I begged him. "Let me understand." His grip tightened on my wrist, not enough to hurt, but enough to hold me in place. His eyes searched my face as though looking for something, some sign that I was not what I appeared to be, some proof that he could dismiss me as easily as he dismissed everyone else who tried to get close to him. "I am a destroyer," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone I love, everyone who loves me, I destroy them. My wife, my daughter, my own mother cannot bear to be in the same house with me. I am poison, Clara. I am death wearing the mask of a man." The sound of my name on his lips sent a shiver through me. I had not known he knew my name. I had assumed I was anonymous to him, just another servant in a house full of servants. "Your wife died in childbirth," I said carefully. "That was not your fault." He laughed then, a harsh and bitter sound that held no joy. "You know nothing about it. You know nothing about me." "Then tell me," I said again. "Make me understand." He released me and stepped back, putting the width of the room between us. His face had become a mask again, cold and distant, and when he spoke, his voice was like stone. "You will leave this house tomorrow. Mrs. Thornton will provide you with a reference and a month's wages. You will go, and you will forget that you ever knew me." I felt as though he had struck me. The pain was so acute, so overwhelming, that for a moment I could not breathe. I had known, of course, that there could never be anything between us. I had known that my love was impossible, that the distance between a duke and a kitchen maid was vaster than any ocean. But I had not expected him to send me away. I had not expected to be cast out like a thief in the night, punished for a crime I had committed only in my heart. "Your Grace," I managed to say, "please, I have done nothing wrong. I have served this house faithfully. I have never asked anything of you, never expected anything. Please do not send me away." He would not look at me. He stood with his back to the fire, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. "It is precisely because you have done nothing wrong that you must go," he said. "If you stay, I will destroy you. I will take everything good and pure in you, and I will crush it, because that is what I do. That is what I am. A destroyer. A man who cannot love without causing harm." "I do not believe that," I said, and my voice was stronger now, fueled by a desperation I had never felt before. "I have watched you for 6 months. I have seen how you treat your tenants, how you care for your servants, how you mourn your wife with a devotion that borders on worship. You are not a destroyer. You are simply afraid." His head snapped up, his eyes blazing with something that might have been anger or might have been recognition. "You know nothing," he repeated, but there was less certainty in his voice now. "I know enough," I said. "I know that you have built walls around yourself so high that no one can reach you. I know that you have decided you deserve to suffer, that happiness is something meant for other people. I know that you are lonely, Your Grace, desperately and terribly lonely, and that some part of you wishes you could let someone in." He stared at me as though I had spoken in a foreign tongue, as though my words were a code he could not quite decipher. "And what would you have me do?" he asked finally. "Open my arms to you? Pretend that the differences between us do not exist? Society would destroy you. You would be ruined, cast out, branded as a fallen woman for the rest of your life. I cannot do that to you. I will not." I understood then what he was doing. He was not sending me away to be cruel. He was sending me away to protect me, to save me from a fate he believed was inevitable. He truly believed that loving him would destroy me, that the chasm between our stations was a death sentence for anyone foolish enough to try to cross it. It was almost noble, in its own twisted way. It was also wrong. "Let me decide what risks I am willing to take," I said. "Let me choose my own fate." "You are not choosing," he said. "You are blind. You see something in me that does not exist, and you are willing to sacrifice everything for an illusion. Then show me the reality." I stepped toward him again, and this time he did not reach out to stop me. "Show me the monster you believe yourself to be. Let me see the truth, and let me decide for myself whether it is as terrible as you fear." For a long moment, he simply looked at me. The fire crackled behind him, sending shadows dancing across his face. The rain hammered against the windows, a relentless reminder of the world outside these walls, a world that would never understand what was passing between us. Then, so quietly, I almost did not hear it, he spoke. "I cannot," he said. "I cannot show you the darkness without letting it consume me. And if it consumes me, it will consume you too." He turned away from me then, walking to the window and pressing his forehead against the cold glass. "Go," he said. "Go now, while I still have the strength to let you. Go and do not look back." I fled the library with tears streaming down my face, and I did not look back. Mrs. Thornton gave me my reference the next morning, along with a small purse of coins and a look of weary pity. She did not ask what had happened. She did not need to ask. She had seen other girls leave the manor with the same broken expression, the same shattered dreams. I was merely the latest in a long line of foolish hearts. The carriage that carried me away from Ashworth Manor rattled down the long drive in the gray morning light, and I watched through the rain-streaked window as the great house grew smaller and smaller behind me. I had not slept. I had spent the night lying awake in my narrow bed, replaying every word the Duke had spoken, searching for some sign that I had misunderstood, some hope that he might change his mind. There had been none. When dawn came, I had packed my meager belongings in silence and descended the servants' stair for the last time. The other maids had whispered as I passed, but none of them spoke to me. They knew what it meant when a girl was dismissed so suddenly, without warning, without explanation. They would draw their own conclusions, and those conclusions would follow me wherever I went. I found work in a village 30 miles away, in the household of a country squire who asked no questions and paid reasonable wages. The months became years. I grew older and wiser and harder, building walls around my heart that I swore would never again be breached. I told myself that I had forgotten the Duke of Ashworth. I told myself that the love I had felt was merely the infatuation of a naive girl, easily outgrown. I became Clara Weston, a name I borrowed from a gravestone in the village churchyard, and I buried Clara Finch so deep that sometimes I almost believed she had never existed. The squire's household was kind enough, in its modest way. The master was an elderly widower who cared more about his horses than his servants, and the mistress was a distant niece who had come to manage the household and stayed because she had nowhere else to go. They did not work us as hard as I had been worked at Ashworth Manor, and they did not pry into our pasts. I was grateful for the anonymity, for the chance to become someone new. I rose through the ranks slowly, as women of my station always did, moving from kitchen maid to housemaid to lady's maid over the course of 7 years. I learned to dress hair in the latest fashions, to select jewelry and accessories that flattered my mistress's coloring, to maintain discretion in all things. I became valued, trusted, respected in my small sphere. I built a life that was stable, if not happy, secure, if not fulfilling. But I never forgot. In the quiet hours of the night, when the house was asleep and I was alone with my thoughts, I would find myself remembering the library at Ashworth Manor, the firelight playing across the Duke's face, the fear and the longing in his storm-gray eyes. I would remember the words he had spoken and the words he had not spoken, the touch of his hand on my wrist, the sound of my name on his lips. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself that he had sent me away and I had no right to think of him, no claim on his memory or his heart. But the heart does not listen to reason, and mine had given itself to a man who did not want it, who believed himself unworthy of it, who had pushed me away to save me from a fate he was certain would be mine. 7 years passed before fate brought me back to Ashworth Manor. My mistress died of a fever that swept through the village, taking her quickly and quietly in the space of 3 days. I nursed her through her final hours, held her hand as she slipped away, and then I found myself alone in the world once more, with a reference in my pocket and nowhere to go. It was then that I received a letter from Mrs. Thornton. The old housekeeper was retiring at last. She wrote, after 40 years of service to the Ashworth family. She had heard through the servants' network that I was seeking a new position, and she wanted to let me know that there might be an opportunity at the manor. The new housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Graves, was in need of a lady's maid for the Dowager Duchess, the Duke's mother, who had recently taken up residence in the manor after years of living abroad. I read that letter a dozen times, trying to understand what I felt. Fear, certainly. The thought of seeing the Duke again made my stomach clench with dread. But there was something else beneath the fear, something I refused to name. Curiosity, perhaps. A need to know what had become of him, whether he had changed, whether he even remembered the girl he had sent away on a rainy night so many years ago. I told myself I was being foolish. I told myself that returning to Ashworth Manor was the worst decision I could possibly make, that it would only reopen wounds I had spent 7 years trying to heal. But even as I made these arguments to myself, I knew that I would go. The pull was too strong, the need too deep. I had to see him again, even if only from a distance, even if he never knew I was there. I wrote back to accept the position. When I arrived at Ashworth Manor, I was struck by how little it had changed. The same gray stone walls, the same ancient oaks lining the drive, the same sense of weight and history pressing down from every corner. I had expected to feel overwhelmed by memory, but instead I felt strangely calm, as though I were returning to a place I had visited only in dreams. The manor's interior, however, showed signs of neglect that had not been present before. The chandeliers were dimmer, some of the crystals missing. The paintings on the walls seemed faded, as though the house itself was slowly retreating from the world. The servants I passed moved with a quiet efficiency that seemed more mechanical than purposeful, as though they were going through motions they had performed so many times they no longer thought about them. Mrs. Graves met me at the servants' entrance, a tall, thin woman with steel-gray hair and a face that looked as though it had never smiled. She looked me over with the same assessing gaze that Mrs. Thornton had used on my first day, 7 years ago, and I felt a flash of déjà vu so strong it nearly knocked me backward. "You are the new lady's maid," she said. "Mrs. Thornton recommended you. She said you were steady." "I hope to prove myself worthy of her confidence," I replied. Mrs. Graves nodded sharply. "The Dowager Duchess is a demanding mistress, but she is fair. Serve her well, and you will have no trouble. Serve her poorly, and you will be gone before the week is out. Do you understand?" "I understand." She led me through the servants' corridors to my new quarters, a small but comfortable room near the Dowager's suite. It was larger than the room I had occupied as a kitchen maid, with a real bed and a writing desk and a window that looked out over the rose garden. I set down my bag and looked around, trying to feel something, trying to make this place feel real. "The Dowager will see you in an hour," Mrs. Graves said. "Make yourself presentable." She left without another word, and I was alone. The Dowager Duchess was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, with silver hair piled high upon her head and a tongue that could cut glass. She received me in her private sitting room, a space filled with French furniture and Chinese porcelain and the faint scent of roses. She looked me over with the same assessing gaze her son had inherited, and I saw in her eyes a keen intelligence that missed nothing. "So you are the new girl," she said. "Mrs. Thornton recommended you. She said you were steady." "I hope to prove myself worthy of her confidence, Your Grace," I replied, echoing my earlier words to Mrs. Graves. The Dowager smiled, a thin curve of her lips that held no warmth. "We shall see. My son's household has been in disarray for far too long. I have returned to set things right, and I will not tolerate incompetence or sentiment. Do you understand?" "I understand, Your Grace." She nodded and dismissed me with a wave of her hand, and I went to my new quarters with the feeling that I had passed some sort of test. I did not know then that the Dowager would become my ally and my confidant, that she would see through my careful disguise and force me to confront the truth I had spent 7 years running from. I did not know that she had plans of her own, plans that would bring her son and me together in ways I could never have imagined. The first time I saw the Duke after my return, I was carrying a breakfast tray to the Dowager's rooms. He was descending the main staircase as I crossed the hall, and for one terrible moment our eyes met. I saw recognition flicker across his face, followed by something that might have been pain. Then his expression closed like a door slamming shut, and he continued down the stairs without a word. He had aged in the 7 years since I had last seen him. The silver at his temples had spread, and there were new lines around his eyes and mouth, lines of grief and weariness that had not been there before. He moved more slowly now, as though the weight he carried had finally begun to bow his shoulders. But his eyes were the same, those storm-gray eyes that had haunted my dreams for 7 long years. I told myself I was relieved. I told myself I was grateful that he had not acknowledged me, that he had not demanded an explanation for my presence in his home. But that night, alone in my narrow bed, I wept until my pillow was soaked, and I knew that I had been lying to myself all along. I still loved him. After everything, after all the years and all the distance and all the carefully constructed walls, I still loved him. And the knowledge was more painful than I could bear. The weeks that followed were a study in avoidance. The Duke and I moved through the same house like ghosts, aware of each other's presence, but never crossing paths except by accident. When we did encounter one another, he looked through me with that same distant gaze, as though I were a stranger, as though we had never shared that moment in the library when the rain fell and the fire burned and my heart laid itself bare before him. I told myself it was better this way. I told myself that his coldness was a mercy, that it would help me maintain the fiction of indifference I needed to survive. But the Dowager Duchess was not fooled. She began to ask me questions, casual inquiries about my past that seemed innocent enough at first, but grew increasingly pointed as the days passed. Where had I worked before coming to Ashworth? What had prompted me to leave my previous position? Had I ever served in a noble household before? I answered as truthfully as I dared, omitting only the 7 months I had spent as a kitchen maid in this very house, but I could see in her eyes that she knew I was hiding something. The confrontation came on a gray afternoon in early autumn. The leaves were turning gold and crimson on the ancient oaks, and the air had acquired that particular crispness that always reminded me of my first autumn at Ashworth Manor. The Dowager summoned me to her sitting room and dismissed the footman who had been attending her, waiting until the door had closed before she spoke. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "I remember when my son sent you away. I was living in Bath at the time, but Mrs. Thornton wrote to me about the girl who had developed an unfortunate attachment to the Duke. She was worried, you see. She had seen my son destroy others who had loved him, and she did not want to see it happen again." I stood very still, my hands clasped before me, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain she could hear it. "Why did you come back?" she asked. I did not know how to answer. I had told myself it was for the position, for the security of employment in a respectable household. But standing before this woman who saw too much, I could not maintain the lie. "I do not know," I admitted. "I thought I had forgotten him. I thought I had moved on. But when the opportunity arose to return, I could not refuse it. I had to see him again, even if only from a distance. I had to know if he had changed." The Dowager was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the pattern of the embroidery in her lap. Outside the window, a gust of wind sent leaves swirling through the air like fragments of flame. "My son," she said finally, "has not changed. He is the same cold, distant, self-destructive man he has always been. He believes himself incapable of love, you see. He believes that everyone who comes close to him will be harmed. It is a conviction born of tragedy, and it has shaped his entire life." I wanted to ask what tragedy she meant, what had happened to make him believe such terrible things about himself. But before I could speak, she continued. "His wife," she said, "Victoria, she died giving birth to their daughter, and the daughter died with her." Edward blamed himself. He had been away when her labor began, attending to business in London, and by the time he returned, it was too late. She had been calling for him, the doctors said. She had been calling for him until the very end. I felt the tears prick at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. I had not known about the wife, not truly. I had heard that she was dead, but I had not understood what her death had done to him. "He decided then that he was cursed," the Dowager continued, her voice heavy with old grief, "that everyone he loved would be taken from him. He shut himself away and vowed never to let anyone close again. He has kept that vow for 15 years. 15 years of loneliness and guilt and silent suffering." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She looked at me with eyes that held a mother's grief and a mother's hope. "Because I am old," she said, "and I am tired, and I cannot bear to watch my son waste what remains of his life. He is not cursed, Clara. He is simply afraid, and you are the only person who has ever looked at him as though he were worthy of love." I shook my head, backing away from her words as though they were physical blows. "There is nothing I can do," I said. "He sent me away once. He would send me away again if he knew I was here." "He knows," the Dowager said quietly. "He has known since the moment you arrived. Why do you think he avoids you so carefully? He is terrified of what he might do if he allows himself to be near you." I fled her sitting room with my composure in tatters, and I spent the rest of that day in a daze, trying to make sense of what she had told me. The Duke knew I was here. He had known all along, and he was not angry, not contemptuous. He was afraid. I had spent 7 years believing that he had sent me away because I meant nothing to him, because I was merely an inconvenience to be disposed of. Now I understood that the truth was far more complicated. He had sent me away because he cared, because he was terrified of caring, because he believed that his love was a curse that would destroy anyone who received it. It was a madness, of course, a self-imposed prison of guilt and fear that had held him captive for far too long. But it was a madness I understood, because I had built my own prison in the years since I left Ashworth Manor. I had convinced myself that I was better off alone, that love was a weakness I could not afford. I had become cold and careful and closed, just like him. Perhaps, I thought, perhaps that was why fate had brought me back. Perhaps we were meant to save each other. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. There was a small chapel on the grounds of Ashworth Manor, a beautiful stone building that had served the family for generations. Built in the Gothic style, it rose against the gray sky like a prayer made solid, its spire reaching toward heaven with patient hope. Stained glass windows depicted scenes from Scripture, their colors muted by centuries of weather, but still capable of casting jeweled light across the ancient flagstones when the sun deigned to show itself. Carved angels guarded the doorway, their faces worn smooth by time and rain, their wings outstretched in eternal benediction. The current vicar, Father Marcus, was an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, beloved by the household and the village alike. He had served the Ashworth family for nearly 30 years, baptizing the Duke's lost daughter, burying the Duke's wife, offering what comfort he could to a man who refused to be comforted. He held services every Sunday and heard confessions every Saturday afternoon, though few of the servants availed themselves of the sacrament. Most of us had learned long ago that it was easier to carry our sins in silence than to speak them aloud. I had never been inside the chapel for confession, but on the Saturday following my conversation with the Dowager, I found myself drawn to its heavy wooden doors. I cannot explain what compelled me to go. Perhaps I needed to speak to someone, anyone, about the turmoil in my heart. Perhaps I hoped that God might provide the guidance that I could not find within myself. Perhaps I simply needed to sit in silence, in a place where the weight of history might lend perspective to my own small troubles. The afternoon was gray and still, the kind of autumn day that seems to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. Leaves lay thick upon the path that wound through the churchyard, and the gravestones rose around me like silent sentinels, each one marking a life that had ended, a story that had been told. I paused before the grave of Victoria, Duchess of Ashworth, and read the inscription carved into the pale marble. Beloved wife and mother, taken too soon. May angels guard her rest. Beside her stone was a smaller one, so small it broke my heart to look at it. The inscription was simple: infant daughter of Edward and Victoria, born and died the same hour, forever in God's arms. I had not known there was a grave for the baby. I had not known that she had been given a resting place beside her mother, that someone had thought to honor the tiny life that had flickered and gone out before it truly began. I stood there for a long moment, tears streaming down my face, grieving for a child I had never known and a man who had lost everything. When I finally entered the chapel, the interior was quiet and dim, lit only by the candles that burned before the altar and the pale gray light that filtered through the windows. The scent of incense lingered in the air, mingled with the smell of old stone and polished wood. The confessional stood against the far wall, a wooden structure divided into 3 compartments, the central one for the priest and the outer ones for penitents. I could see through the dim light that someone was already inside, their shadow visible through the latticed screen. I knelt in a pew near the entrance, waiting for them to finish, planning to make my own confession when the booth was empty. The wood was hard beneath my knees, and the cold seeped through my dress, but I welcomed the discomfort. It seemed fitting somehow, a small penance for the confusion that churned within me. I had been kneeling there for perhaps 5 minutes when I heard footsteps at the chapel door. Someone else had come to confess. I should have left. I should have slipped out the side door and returned another time, allowing the other penitent the privacy they deserved. But something held me in place, some instinct that told me to wait, to listen. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows of the pew and held my breath. The figure that entered the chapel was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the careful precision of a man who had learned to control his every motion. He walked slowly, his footsteps echoing in the empty space, and even before he passed into the light of the altar candles, I knew who it was. Even in the dim light, I recognized him. Even after 7 years of trying to forget, I would have known him anywhere. The Duke of Ashworth had come to confess his sins. My heart stopped in my chest. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle the gasp that threatened to escape, and I sank lower in the pew, making myself as small as possible. I should leave, I told myself. I had no right to be here, no right to witness this most private of moments. But my legs would not obey me. I could not move, could not look away. The person who had been in the confessional emerged, a village woman I did not recognize, her head bowed and her lips moving in silent prayer. She did not see me crouched in the shadows. She walked past me and out the door, leaving the Duke alone with Father Marcus. I watched as he approached the confessional, his movements hesitant, uncertain. This was not a man accustomed to uncertainty. This was a man who commanded estates and tenants and servants, a man whose word was law within his domain. But here, in this sacred space, he seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of whatever he carried. He entered the confessional and knelt. I heard the creak of wood as he settled into position, heard the soft murmur of Father Marcus's voice offering the traditional greeting. And then I heard the Duke speak, and his words were like nothing I had ever expected. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been many years since my last confession. I do not know where to begin." His voice was different from the voice I remembered, from the voice I had heard on that rainy night in the library. It was raw and broken, stripped of all the careful control he usually maintained. It was the voice of a man who had reached the end of his endurance, who had come to this sacred place as a last resort. "Begin wherever you feel called, my son," Father Marcus replied. "God is patient. He has waited for you this long. He will wait as long as you need." There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of rain beginning to fall against the windows. The afternoon had grown darker, the gray light fading to something closer to dusk. When the Duke spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I have destroyed everyone who ever loved me. My wife, my daughter, the servants who tried to serve me faithfully. I have driven them all away with my coldness, my cruelty, my inability to accept the affection they offered. I have been a monster, Father. A monster wearing the mask of a man. I could not move. I could not breathe. I knelt in the shadows with tears streaming down my face, listening to the man I loved lay bare the guilt that had consumed him for 15 years. My wife called for me when she was dying," he continued, his voice cracking on the words. "She called for me, and I was not there. I was in London, attending to matters of business that seemed so important at the time. When I returned, she was already gone, she and my daughter both. The doctors said Victoria had labored for nearly 2 days, that she had fought so hard to bring our child into the world. She kept asking for me, they said. She kept saying my name, kept believing that I would come, that I would not abandon her in her hour of need. And I did. I abandoned her. I was not there when she needed me most, and she died calling my name." The grief in his voice was so raw, so profound, that I felt it in my own chest like a physical wound. I had not known. I had not understood the depth of his suffering, the terrible weight of guilt he had carried for so long. "That is a heavy burden to carry," Father Marcus said gently. "But it was not your fault, my son. You could not have known that her time would come early. You could not have known that there would be complications. Could I not? The Duke's voice was bitter now, edged with a self-loathing so deep it made my heart ache. I knew she was near her time. I knew the doctors had expressed concern about her health. But I left anyway, because I was afraid. Afraid of what I would feel when I saw my daughter. Afraid of how much I already loved them both. I ran away from my own family, Father. I ran away from love because love terrified me, and they died while I was running. I pressed my hand harder against my mouth, biting down on my fingers to keep from crying out. The pain in his words was unbearable, the self-hatred so complete that I wanted to rush to him, to hold him, to tell him that he was wrong, that he was not a monster, that he was simply a man who had made a terrible mistake and punished himself for it far beyond what any mistake deserved. But I stayed where I was, frozen in the shadows, because I knew that he needed to say these things, that he needed to speak the truth that had been festering inside him for 15 years. He needed to confess, and I needed to bear witness, even if he never knew I was there. There was a girl, he said, and my heart stopped. A servant girl many years ago. She was young and kind and good, and she looked at me as though I were capable of being loved. She saw something in me that I could not see in myself, something that I had convinced myself did not exist, and I sent her away. I sent her away because I knew that if I let her stay, I would ruin her. I would take her sweetness and her hope, and I would crush them, the way I crush everything I touch. Do you regret sending her away? Father Marcus asked. Every day. The Duke's voice broke on the words, cracking like ice over dark water. Every single day for 7 years. I wake in the night, and I see her face, and I remember the way she looked at me in the library that night, with such trust, such faith. And I remember the way I shattered that faith, the way I sent her out into the cold because I was too much of a coward to let her love me. Do you believe you were right to send her away? I believed it at the time. I told myself it was for her own good, that I was protecting her from myself. But now I am not so certain. My mother tells me that I have wasted my life in guilt, that Victoria would not have wanted this, that my daughter would not have wanted this. She tells me that the girl, Clara, would not have wanted this either. And what do you believe? I do not know any more. I do not know what I believe. I only know that I am tired. Tired of being alone. Tired of punishing myself for sins I cannot undo. Tired of pushing away everyone who tries to care for me. Father Marcus was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was full of compassion. My son, he said, guilt is not the same as repentance. Punishment is not the same as atonement. God does not ask us to destroy ourselves in payment for our sins. He asks us to acknowledge them, to learn from them, and to strive to do better. Have you done this? I have tried, the Duke said. I have given to charity. I have treated my tenants fairly. I have been just in my dealings, if not kind. But it is never enough. The guilt remains. It is always there, waiting for me in the silence, reminding me of what I have done and what I have failed to do. Because you have not forgiven yourself, the priest said. And you have not sought forgiveness from those you believe you have wronged. My wife is dead. My daughter is dead. How can I seek their forgiveness? Are they the only ones you have wronged? There was a long pause. I could hear the Duke's breathing, ragged and uneven, could almost feel the struggle taking place within him as he wrestled with words he had never spoken aloud. The girl, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper, so soft I had to strain to hear it. The servant girl. I wronged her more than I have ever admitted, even to myself. I sent her away not because I did not love her, but because I did. I loved her, Father. I loved her with a desperation that terrified me, and rather than face that terror, I cast her out. I told her that I would destroy her, that I was incapable of love. But the truth is that I was simply afraid to try. I was weeping openly now. my tears falling silently onto the cold stone floor. He had loved me. All those years ago, in the library where the rain fell and the fire burned, he had loved me. And I had believed myself worthless, had spent 7 years convinced that I meant nothing to him, when all along he had been carrying the same weight of loss and longing that I carried. "If you could speak to this girl now," Father Marcus said, "what would you say to her?" "I would beg her forgiveness." The Duke's voice was thick with emotion, trembling with the effort of speaking words he had never allowed himself to say. "I would tell her that she was right to love me, even if I was too broken to accept it. I would tell her that she was the only light in my darkness, the only warmth in my winter. I would tell her that sending her away was the greatest mistake of my life, and that I have regretted it every moment since. I would tell her that I love her still, that I have never stopped loving her, that I will love her until my last breath and beyond." "Then perhaps, Father," the priest said gently, "you should tell her." "She is gone," the Duke said. "She left years ago. I do not even know if she is still alive. I have thought of searching for her, of hiring investigators to find her, but I could not bring myself to do it. What right do I have to disrupt her life? What right do I have to ask for forgiveness I do not deserve? I could not stay silent any longer. I could not let him believe that I was lost to him forever, not when I was here, not when I had heard every word he had spoken." I rose from my place in the shadows and walked toward the confessional, my footsteps echoing in the empty chapel. The Duke heard me coming. He emerged from the confessional with his face pale and his eyes wild, and when he saw me standing there with tears on my cheeks, he staggered back as though I had struck him. "Clara," he breathed, and my name on his lips was like a prayer. "I am here," I said. "I have been here since you came back to my life, and I heard everything." He shook his head, retreating from me even as I advanced, his hands raised as though to ward me off. "You should not have heard that. You should not have been here. You should not." His voice trailed off, and I saw in his eyes a fear so profound it took my breath away. He was not afraid of me. He was afraid of hope, afraid that this moment was not real, afraid that he would wake to find it was nothing but another cruel dream. I reached out and took his hands, stilling his words, stilling his flight. His fingers were cold and trembling, and I held them as gently as I would have held something precious and fragile. "I forgive you," I said. He stared at me as though I had spoken in a language he did not understand. His eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had haunted my dreams for 7 years, searched my face with desperate intensity. "I forgive you," I repeated, "for sending me away, for believing yourself unworthy of love, for all the years of pain and loneliness that we both endured, because you were too afraid to let me stay." "You cannot," he whispered. "You cannot forgive what I have done to you. You do not know what it cost me to send you away, what it has cost me every day since. You cannot simply absolve me with 3 words. I already have." I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the tears gathering in his storm-gray eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of his breath on my face. "I have forgiven you 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways, over 1,000 sleepless nights. The forgiveness was always waiting, Edward. You simply had to come and claim it." The use of his Christian name seemed to break something in him. A sob escaped his throat, raw and anguished, and suddenly he was holding me, his arms wrapped around me so tightly I could barely breathe, his face buried in my hair, his body shaking with the force of emotions too long suppressed. I held him as he wept, this proud and distant Duke, this man who had built his life around the conviction that he was cursed. He broke in my arms like a child, his sobs echoing through the empty chapel, the release of 15 years of grief pouring out of him in great wrenching waves. I held him and stroked his hair and whispered words of comfort that I had waited 7 years to say. "I love you," I told him. "I loved you then, and I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath. You are not cursed. You are not a monster. You are simply a man who has suffered too long in silence, and you do not have to suffer alone anymore." Father Marcus had emerged from the confessional and stood watching us with an expression of profound peace. The candlelight cast a golden glow over his weathered features, and in that moment he seemed less like an elderly priest and more like an angel bearing witness to a miracle. When the Duke's sobs finally subsided, Father Marcus approached and laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. "This," he said, "is what forgiveness looks like. This is what grace feels like. Remember this moment, my son, when the darkness returns. Remember that you were found worthy of love." The Duke raised his head and looked at me with eyes that were red-rimmed but clear. The mask he had worn for so long had finally fallen away, and I saw him as he truly was, vulnerable, wounded, desperately in need of the love he had denied himself for so long. "I do not deserve this," he said. "I do not deserve you." "Love is not about deserving," I replied. "It is about choosing. I choose you. I have always chosen you. Now you must choose whether to accept what I am offering." He reached up and touched my face, his fingers tracing the path of my tears with a tenderness that made my heart ache. His hand was warm now, no longer trembling, and the touch was so gentle it felt like a blessing. "I am afraid," he admitted. "I am terrified that I will hurt you, that I will ruin everything good between us. I am terrified that the curse I carry will touch you too, that loving me will bring you nothing but pain." "Then be afraid with me," I said. "Be terrified with me. We will face it together, and we will find our way through. I would rather face the darkness at your side than live in the light without you." He closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against mine, and for a long moment we simply stood there, breathing the same air, sharing the same heartbeat. The rain had stopped, I realized. Outside the chapel windows, the clouds were breaking apart, and a shaft of pale golden light was falling through the stained glass, casting colors across the floor at our feet. Red and blue and gold, the colors of faith and hope and love, spilling over us like a benediction. "I choose you," he whispered. "God help me. I choose you." Father Marcus cleared his throat softly, and we turned to look at him. He was smiling, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "I have waited many years to hear those words from you, Your Grace," he said. "I have prayed for this moment more times than I can count. I believe that God has answered my prayers today, and yours as well." The Duke, Edward, my Edward, looked at the old priest with something approaching wonder. "You have been praying for me?" "Every day since Victoria's death," Father Marcus replied. "Every day I have asked God to send someone who could reach the heart you had locked away. I believe he has finally answered." Edward turned back to me, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen there before. Hope, pure, unguarded hope, rising like the sun after a long and terrible night. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "I know it is madness. I know that society will condemn us both, that there will be scandal and whispers and doors closed in our faces. But I cannot let you go again. I cannot spend another day without you. Will you be my wife?" I laughed then, a sound that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, surprising us both. "Yes," I said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I will marry you, Edward. I will be your wife, your partner, your companion through whatever storms may come. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." He kissed me then, there in the chapel where we had found each other, with Father Marcus as our witness and God as our judge. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, the kiss of a man who had forgotten how to express tenderness and was learning it again for the first time. I felt his tears on my cheeks, mingling with my own, and I knew that this was the beginning of something new, something beautiful, something neither of us had dared to hope for. When we finally drew apart, Father Marcus was beaming at us both. "I would be honored," he said, to perform the ceremony when you are ready. This chapel has seen much sorrow in recent years. It would do my old heart good to see it witness joy." Edward looked at me, and I saw the question in his eyes. "What do you say?" he asked. "Shall we do it properly, bands and guests and all the trappings society demands? Or shall we do it here, quietly, just the three of us and God?" I thought of the Dowager, who had schemed so carefully to bring us together. I thought of Mrs. Thornton, who had given me a second chance when I least expected it. I thought of all the people who had played a part in bringing us to this moment, and I knew what my answer must be. "Both," I said. "Let us marry here, quietly, for ourselves, and then let us marry again, publicly, for the world. Let them see that love can triumph over fear, that forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds. Let them see that a duke can love a servant girl, and that she can love him in return." Edward smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face, and I saw in that smile the man he had been before grief had frozen his heart, the man he could be again with love and patience and time. "Both it shall be," he said, "and may God have mercy on anyone who dares to object." We walked out of that chapel together, hand in hand, into a world that would not easily accept what we had found. The sun was breaking through the clouds, painting the churchyard in shades of gold and amber, and the wet leaves glistened like jewels scattered across the grass. Edward paused at Victoria's grave, still holding my hand, and I felt him stiffen beside me. "I should introduce you," he said quietly. "My first wife and my daughter." I knelt beside the graves and placed my hand on the cold marble of Victoria's headstone. "I did not know her," I said, "but I know that she was loved. I know that she gave you joy while she lived, and I know that she would not want you to suffer as you have. I will take care of him, Victoria. I will love him as you loved him, and I will help him remember how to be happy. I promise you that." I felt Edward kneel beside me, felt his hand cover mine on the stone. "Thank you," he whispered, and I did not know if he was speaking to me or to the wife he had lost or to God himself. We remained there for a long moment, the three of us together in that quiet place, and I felt something shift in the air around us, a sense of peace, of completion, as though a circle had finally closed. Victoria was gone, and the daughter who had never drawn breath was gone, but their memory would live on in the man who had loved them and in the love that we would build together. When we finally rose and turned toward the house, I saw the Dowager standing on the terrace, watching us with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Even from this distance, I could see the smile playing at the corners of her lips. "She knew," I said. "She knew this would happen." Edward nodded. "My mother has always been a schemer, but in this case, I believe I owe her a debt of gratitude." We walked toward the house together, and as we drew closer, the Dowager descended the steps to meet us. She looked from Edward to me and back again, and her smile widened. "It is about time," she said. "I was beginning to think I would die of old age before the two of you came to your senses." "Mother," Edward said, and there was a warmth in his voice that I had never heard before, "I would like to introduce you to Clara, my betrothed." The Dowager raised one elegant eyebrow. "Betrothed already?" "You waste no time, my son." "I have wasted enough time," Edward replied. 15 years of it. I do not intend to waste another moment." The Dowager turned to me, and I saw in her eyes a warmth that had not been there before. "Welcome to the family, my dear," she said. "I knew from the moment I saw you that you were exactly what my son needed. I am glad he has finally realized it as well." She embraced me then, a brief but genuine embrace that told me more than words ever could. I was accepted. I was welcomed. I was no longer a servant in this house. I was family. The weeks that followed our reconciliation in the chapel were among the strangest and most wonderful of my life. Edward, whom I was slowly learning to call by his Christian name in private, though never in public, treated me with a tenderness I had not dared to imagine. He sought me out in the corridors when he thought no one was watching, his fingers brushing against mine in passing, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. He sent me flowers from the hothouse, small bouquets of violets and roses that appeared in my room without explanation. He wrote me letters, pages and pages of words he could not bring himself to speak aloud, confessions of love and fear and hope that I read by candlelight and pressed beneath my pillow. We married in the chapel on a quiet Thursday morning, with only Father Marcus and the Dowager as witnesses. I wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk, borrowed from the Dowager's closet and hastily altered to fit my smaller frame, and Edward wore the same dark suit he wore every day. But there was nothing ordinary about the way he looked at me as I walked down the aisle toward him. His eyes held mine with an intensity that made my knees weak, and when he took my hand in his, I felt as though the whole world had narrowed to this moment, this place, this man. Father Marcus spoke the words that would bind us together, ancient words that had been spoken in this chapel for generations, and we repeated them with voices that trembled with emotion. When Edward slipped the ring onto my finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother, I felt something click into place inside me. Some piece of myself I had not known was missing. "You may kiss the bride," Father Marcus said, and Edward gathered me into his arms and kissed me with a passion that left us both breathless. The Dowager dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief and pronounced it the most romantic thing she had ever witnessed, and Father Marcus blessed us with words of hope and joy, and then we walked out of the chapel as husband and wife into a world that did not yet know what we had done. It was the Dowager who devised the fiction that would allow us to marry publicly without destroying my reputation entirely. A distant cousin, she proclaimed, from the Weston branch of the family, a connection so remote that no one could remember the particulars, but no one could disprove it either. She produced letters and documents and family trees, elaborate constructions of ink and paper that transformed Clara the servant into Clara the gentlewoman, a woman of modest means but respectable birth, a suitable match for a widowed duke who had mourned long enough. The servants knew the truth, of course. They always do. But they held their tongues, whether out of affection for me or fear of the Dowager, I never knew. And society, eager to see the Duke of Ashworth emerge from his long seclusion, was willing to accept the fiction without too much scrutiny. A public wedding was planned, invitations sent, and I found myself swept up in a whirlwind of preparations that left me breathless and bewildered. I remember standing in the dressmaker's shop in London, surrounded by swaths of silk and lace, as the seamstresses pinned and tucked and adjusted the gown I would wear on my public wedding day. It was ivory satin, embroidered with seed pearls, more beautiful than anything I had ever imagined wearing. I stared at my reflection in the mirror and could not recognize the woman who looked back at me. "Is something wrong?" the Dowager asked, watching me with sharp eyes. "I do not know who she is," I admitted, gesturing at the mirror. "This woman in the beautiful dress. She is not Clara the kitchen maid. She is not Clara the lady's maid. I do not know what to call her." The Dowager came to stand beside me, placing her hand on my shoulder. "She is Clara," she said simply. "She has always been Clara. The dress does not change who you are. It simply allows others to see what was always there." I turned to look at her, this woman who had schemed and planned and manipulated to bring her son and me together. "What if they see through it?" I asked. "What if someone discovers the truth?" "Then they will discover that my son fell in love with a remarkable woman who happened to be born in humble circumstances," the Dowager replied. "They will discover that love does not care about social standing or family lineage. They will discover what I have known since the moment I first saw you, that you were made for each other and that nothing else matters." She squeezed my shoulder and smiled at me in the mirror. "Besides," she added, "anyone who dares to question your place in this family will have to answer to me. And I assure you, my dear, that is not an experience they would enjoy." The public wedding took place a month after our private ceremony, in the great cathedral in London, where Ashworths had been married for 300 years. The church was filled with flowers, white roses and lilies and orange blossoms, their scent so thick in the air that I felt almost drunk with it. The pews were filled with society's finest. Lords and ladies and wealthy merchants who had come to see the Duke of Ashworth finally emerge from his long seclusion and take a new bride. I walked down the aisle on the arm of a distant cousin the dowager had produced for the occasion, a kindly old gentleman who patted my hand and told me not to be nervous, that I was the prettiest bride he had ever seen. I barely heard him. My eyes were fixed on Edward, standing at the altar in his formal attire, watching me approach with an expression of such love and wonder that I felt tears prick at my eyes. The ceremony passed in a blur. I remember speaking my vows, remember the weight of the ring on my finger, remember the thunderous applause that erupted when Edward kissed me. But what I remember most clearly is the look in his eyes as we turned to face the congregation as husband and wife. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. There was only love, pure and unguarded, shining from his storm-gray eyes like sunlight after a long and terrible winter. The reception was held at Ashworth House in London, the family's grand townhouse that had been closed for years and hastily reopened for the occasion. The rooms were filled with light and music and laughter, and I moved through them in a daze, accepting congratulations from people whose names I would never remember, smiling until my face ached, holding Edward's hand so tightly I feared I might break his fingers. "You are doing wonderfully," he whispered to me at one point, leaning close so that only I could hear. "They are all enchanted by you." "I am terrified," I whispered back. "So am I," he admitted, "but at least we are terrified together." We danced our first waltz as husband and wife, and as Edward led me across the floor, I felt the eyes of every person in the room upon us. They were looking for cracks in the facade, I knew, searching for some sign that this marriage was not what it appeared to be. They would find nothing. We had practiced this dance a dozen times in the privacy of the Manor's ballroom, and we moved together as though we had been dancing for years. When the music ended, Edward pulled me close and kissed my forehead. "You are magnificent," he murmured. "I am the luckiest man alive." The dowager appeared at our side, her eyes bright with triumph. "It is done," she said. "You are well and truly married now in the eyes of God and man. Let anyone dare to say otherwise." "Thank you, Mother," Edward said, and he embraced her with a warmth that brought tears to her eyes. "For everything." The dowager patted his cheek and smiled at me. "Just give me grandchildren," she said. "That is all the thanks I require." I felt myself blush, and Edward laughed, a genuine laugh that I had never heard from him before. "We shall do our best," he promised. We returned to Ashworth Manor the following week, leaving London and its gossips behind. The great house seemed different now, brighter somehow, as though the love we shared had seeped into the very stones and mortar. The servants no longer whispered about the cold Duke and his mysterious lady. They smiled when they saw us walking together in the gardens, my hand tucked into the crook of his arm, my head resting against his shoulder. They knew that something beautiful had happened here, even if they did not know all the details. I am Lady Ashworth now, a title I never expected and still sometimes struggle to believe. But when my husband takes my hand and looks at me with eyes that have finally learned to hope, I remember that love does not care about titles or stations or the rigid rules of society. Love simply is, patient and persistent, waiting for us to be brave enough to claim it. We speak of Victoria sometimes, the wife he lost, and the daughter who never drew breath. I have learned not to be jealous of ghosts, for they are part of him, part of the man I love. We have placed flowers on their graves together, and I have wept beside him as he said the words of farewell he never had the chance to speak. He carries them with him still, but the weight is lighter now, shared between us. His mother tells me that I have given her son back to her. But I think the truth is simpler than that. I have given him permission to forgive himself, which is the only gift that ever truly mattered. And in return, he has given me a home, a family, and a love that I had given up hope of ever finding. There are still difficult days, of course. The darkness does not simply vanish because we wish it away. Sometimes I find him standing by the window in the early morning hours, staring out at nothing, lost in memories I cannot share. Sometimes he withdraws into himself, retreating behind the walls he built so carefully over so many years. But he always comes back to me. He always finds his way home. I remember one night, perhaps 6 months after our wedding, when I woke to find his side of the bed empty. I rose and went looking for him, padding through the dark corridors in my nightgown, following an instinct that led me to the library where we had first confronted each other all those years ago. He was standing by the window, just as I had known he would be, staring out at the moonlit grounds. He did not turn when I entered, but I saw his shoulders relax slightly, as though some tension had eased at the sound of my footsteps. "I dreamed of her again," he said quietly. "Victoria. She was calling for me, and I could not reach her." I crossed the room and slipped my arms around him from behind, pressing my cheek against his back. I did not speak. There were no words that could ease that particular pain. I simply held him, letting him know that he was not alone. After a long moment, he turned in my arms and gathered me against his chest. His heart was beating hard beneath my ear, but as I held him, I felt it slow to a steadier rhythm. "I do not know why I still dream of her," he murmured into my hair. "I have found peace in my waking hours. I have found you. But in my dreams, I am still the man I was, still haunted by the guilt I thought I had laid to rest." "Guilt does not disappear overnight," I told him. "It takes time. But it will fade, Edward. I promise you. It will fade until it is nothing more than a distant ache, a reminder of what was but not a chain binding you to it." He tightened his arms around me. "How do you know?" he asked. "How can you be so certain?" "Because I have seen it happen," I said. "I have seen it in you, every day since we married. You smile more now. You laugh. You look at the world with hope instead of fear. The man you were is fading, and the man you are becoming is beautiful." He pulled back to look at me, and in the moonlight I could see the tears glistening on his cheeks. "I do not deserve you," he said. "I will never deserve you." "Then spend the rest of your life trying to," I replied. "That is all I ask." He kissed me then, a slow and tender kiss that tasted of salt and surrender. And then he took my hand and led me back to our bed, and we held each other until dawn broke over the horizon and the shadows of the night receded once more. The years passed, as years do, with their particular mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and disappointment. Edward and I grew into our love, learned its dimensions, discovered its depths. We found that passion does not diminish with time, but deepens, taking on richer colors and more complex textures as the seasons turn. The Dowager Duchess lived to see her son transformed, and I like to think it gave her peace. She passed quietly in her sleep on a winter night 5 years after our wedding, with her family gathered around her, and her last words to me were words of gratitude. "You gave me back my son," she whispered, her hand frail and cold in mine. "That is a gift beyond measure." I wept at her funeral, for she had been more than a mother-in-law to me. She had been an ally, a friend, and in her own fierce way, a mother. Edward held me as I cried, and when I looked up at him, I saw the same grief reflected in his eyes. But there was something else there, too. Something that had not been present when I first returned to Ashworth Manor. There was acceptance. There was peace. "We have each other," he said. "She would want us to remember that." I nodded, unable to speak, but I understood what he meant. The Dowager had spent her final years working to bring us together, to heal the wounds that time had inflicted. She would not want her death to undo all that she had accomplished. She would want us to go on, to live, to love each other as fiercely as she had loved her son. And so we did. Father Marcus still presides over the little chapel where we found each other, though he is very old now and his hands tremble when he lifts the communion cup. We visit him often, Edward and I, and we sit with him in the rectory while he tells us stories of the families who have worshipped here over the generations. He always ends these visits with a blessing, his weathered hands resting on our heads, his voice quavering but certain. "May God grant you peace," he says. "May he fill your hearts with his love, and may you always remember that you are forgiven." I treasure those blessings more than I can say. They remind me of where we started, of the moment when everything changed. They remind me that forgiveness is not a single act, but a continuous practice, a choice we make again and again, every day, for as long as we live. Edward still struggles sometimes. The shadows of the past have not vanished entirely, and there are nights when he wakes from dreams of his first wife, his daughter, the life he lost. But he no longer suffers alone. He turns to me in those dark hours, and I hold him until the trembling stops, until the tears dry, until the dawn breaks over the horizon and the world begins anew. We have built a life together, he and I, a life that neither of us ever expected to have. It is a life filled with small pleasures and quiet joys, with morning walks and evening fires, with books read aloud and letters written and received. It is a life marked by the rhythm of the seasons, by the turning of the years, by the steady accumulation of memories that will sustain us in our old age. And it is a life rooted in forgiveness. Forgiveness for the past, for the mistakes we made, for the pain we caused. Forgiveness for each other, and more importantly, forgiveness for ourselves. I think sometimes of the young woman I used to be, the kitchen maid who wept herself to sleep night after night, convinced that she would never be happy again. I wish I could tell her what awaits her on the other side of her suffering. I wish I could show her the life she will build, the love she will find, the man who will kneel beside her in a chapel and pour out his heart. But perhaps it is better that she did not know. Perhaps the journey would have been less meaningful if she had known the destination. Perhaps the forgiveness would have been less precious if it had come easily. All I know is that I am grateful. Grateful for every moment of pain that led me here, grateful for every tear I shed, grateful for the courage that carried me back to Ashworth Manor when every instinct screamed at me to stay away. Grateful most of all for the man who sleeps beside me now, his breath soft and even, his face peaceful in the moonlight. He is not perfect, he never will be. But he is mine, and I am his. And that is more than enough. The Duke confessed his sins to a priest, and the maid behind the screen wept. But those tears were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of recognition, of release, of a love that had waited 7 long years to be spoken. They were tears of forgiveness, and they set us both free. I close my eyes now and listen to the sound of the rain against the windows, so much like that long-ago night in the library when my heart first betrayed me. But I am not afraid anymore. I am not hiding. I am simply here, in this moment, in this life, in this love that I have chosen, and that has chosen me in return. And when the morning comes, as it always does, I will rise and greet it with gratitude. I will take my husband's hand and walk with him into whatever the day brings. I will love him and forgive him, and be loved and forgiven in return. This is what it means to be human, I think. This is what it means to be alive. Not the absence of suffering, but the presence of grace. Not the end of pain, but the beginning of healing. I have learned this lesson in the hardest possible way, and I would not trade it for anything in the world. The manor is different now, warmer somehow, as though the love we share has seeped into the very stones and mortar. The servants no longer whisper about the cold Duke and his mysterious lady. They smile when they see us walking together in the gardens, my hand tucked into the crook of his arm, my head resting against his shoulder. They know that something beautiful has happened here, even if they do not know all the details. We have made changes to the house over the years, Edward and I. Small changes, for the most part, but meaningful ones. We have opened the curtains that had been closed for so long, letting light flood into rooms that had known only shadow. We have filled the vases with fresh flowers, replaced the faded carpets with bright new ones, hung paintings that speak of joy rather than duty. The great hall where I once scrubbed floors on my knees is now a place of warmth and welcome, where guests are received with genuine hospitality instead of cold formality. The library, that sacred space where we first confronted each other, has become our favorite retreat. We spend our evenings there still, Edward and I, reading by the fire while the rain falls against the windows. Sometimes we read aloud to each other, sharing the words of poets and philosophers who understood something of what we have experienced. Sometimes we simply sit in companionable silence, grateful for the presence of the other, for the peace we have found in each other's arms. I have my own corner now, the window seat where I used to hide, but I no longer hide there. I sit in the open, in the light, where my husband can see me and I can see him. There are no more secrets between us, no more walls, no more barriers. There is only love, honest and unashamed, growing stronger with each passing year. The villagers have accepted me as Lady Ashworth, though I know some of them remember the girl who used to walk these lanes with calloused hands and a servant's cap. They treat me with the respect my position demands, but there is warmth beneath the formality, an understanding that I am one of them at heart, that I have not forgotten where I came from. I visit the sick and the poor, as the ladies of the manor have always done, but I do not do it out of duty alone. I do it because I remember what it was like to be poor, to be hungry, to be frightened of the future. I bring food and medicine and comfort, and I listen to their stories with an attention that comes from genuine empathy. They trust me, these people. In a way, they never trusted the ladies who came before me. They know that I understand. Edward accompanies me sometimes, and I have watched with quiet joy as he has learned to see his tenants as people rather than obligations. He knows their names now, their children's names, their hopes and fears and dreams. He has become the master that his father never was, kind as well as just, present as well as powerful. The estate has flourished under his renewed attention, and the people who work the land have prospered along with it. I think sometimes about the path that led me here, the strange and winding journey from a village cottage to a duke's bed. I think about all the moments when I might have chosen differently, all the crossroads where I might have taken another turning. What if I had not applied for the position at Ashworth Manor all those years ago? What if I had not fallen in love with a man so far above my station? What if I had stayed away when Mrs. Thornton's letter came, had refused to return to the place that had caused me so much pain? I would have lived a different life, I suppose. A smaller life, a safer life, a life without the heights of joy or the depths of sorrow that I have known. But it would not have been this life, this love, this extraordinary gift that I have been given, and I cannot imagine wanting anything else. The seasons turn and the years pass, and still I wake each morning grateful for the man who lies beside me. Still I marvel at the love we share, at the forgiveness that made it possible, at the grace that found us when we least expected it. We have been married now for more years than I can easily count, and still Edward looks at me as though I am the most precious thing in his world. Still, he reaches for my hand when we walk together. Still, he whispers my name in the darkness. Still, he holds me as though he cannot quite believe I am real. I am real, I tell him when he voices these doubts. I am here. I am not going anywhere. Promise me, he says, his voice muffled against my hair. I promise. I reply. Always. It is not a promise I take lightly. I know what it means to him, this assurance of permanence in a world that has taken so much from him. I know that some part of him still fears losing me, still dreads the moment when fate might snatch me away, as it snatched Victoria and their daughter. But I also know that this fear is smaller now than it once was, contained by the love we have built, held at bay by the trust we have earned. We have learned, Edward and I, that love is not a feeling, but a practice. It is the choice we make each morning to be kind, to be patient, to be present. It is the forgiveness we offer when forgiveness is needed, the understanding we extend when understanding is difficult, the grace we give freely because it was given freely to us. We have learned that happiness is not a destination, but a journey, not a place to arrive at, but a way of traveling. We have learned that the darkness will come, as it always does, but that it cannot stay forever, not as long as we have each other to hold on to. I am Clara, Lady Ashworth. I was a servant girl who loved a duke, and against all odds, that love survived. This is my story. This is my truth. This is my prayer of thanksgiving, offered up into the darkness, trusting that somewhere, somehow, it will be heard. And if you are reading this, if you are struggling with your own burdens and your own regrets, let me offer you the same gift that was given to me. Forgiveness is possible. Love is possible. Redemption is possible. You only have to be brave enough to reach for it. I know, because I did. I reached across 7 years of silence, across a lifetime of doubt, across all the barriers that society and circumstance had placed between us. I reached, and he reached back, and together we found something that neither of us believed we deserved. We found each other. And in finding each other, we found ourselves. That is the true miracle of this story. Not that a duke married a servant, not that a sinner was forgiven, not that love conquered all the obstacles in its path. The true miracle is simpler and more profound than any of that. The true miracle is that we allowed ourselves to be vulnerable. We allowed ourselves to need. We allowed ourselves to trust that the other person would not turn away. And they did not. He did not turn away from me, and I did not turn away from him. And in that mutual refusal to abandon each other, we discovered what it truly means to love. I carry that discovery with me every day. I carry it like a lantern in the darkness, a flame that no storm can extinguish. It guides me through the difficult moments and illuminates the beautiful ones. It reminds me who I am and who I have chosen to be. I am Clara. I am loved. I am forgiven. And for that, I will be grateful until the end of my days. The candles in the chapel have long since burned down to stubs, and the rain has stopped, and the world outside is quiet and still. But I can still hear the echo of my husband's voice in that sacred space, still feel the weight of his confession hanging in the air. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. And I can still hear my own voice, rising from the shadows, offering the only response that ever truly mattered. I forgive you. These words have become our touchstone, Edward's and mine. We return to them again and again, in moments of conflict and moments of peace, in times of plenty and times of want. They are the foundation upon which our marriage is built, the bedrock beneath our feet. Forgiveness is not a single moment. It is a practice, a discipline, a choice we make each day to release the weight of the past and embrace the possibility of the present. It is the most difficult thing I have ever done, and the most rewarding. And I would do it all again, every moment of it, if it meant arriving at this place where I now stand. The manor sleeps around me, and my husband sleeps beside me, and somewhere in the distance an owl calls out into the night. I listen to these sounds of peace and plenty, and I am filled with a gratitude so profound it borders on reverence. This is my life. This is my love. This is the grace that found me in the darkness and led me home. I close my eyes and breathe deeply, and I surrender myself to the peace that has been so long in coming. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own joys, its own opportunities for forgiveness and growth. But tonight, there is only this, only the rain and the silence and the steady rhythm of my husband's heart. Only love, patient and persistent, refusing to give up. Only grace, unexpected and undeserved, transforming everything it touches. Only the simple, impossible miracle of two wounded souls who found their way to each other across the years. I forgive you, I whisper into the darkness, speaking the words not to my husband, but to myself, to the girl I was, to all the pain and fear and doubt that brought me here. I forgive you. I forgive everything. And in that forgiveness, I find at last the peace I have been seeking all my life. The Duke confessed his sins to a priest, and the maid behind the screen wept. But the tears were not of sorrow. They were of joy, of release, of a love that had finally found its voice. They were tears of forgiveness, freely given and gratefully received. And they were the beginning of everything,